What's the fastest you've seen someone quit or get fired? Didn't even make it to his desk. I was working for a telecom company back in the day. My team was developing a self-install program for cable modems. To tell you how long it was ago, the spec called for it to fit on a floppy disk just in case. Anyways, I hired a new employee. Looked completely normal. Average guy. I walk him to his workstation. I tell him this will be your desk. He just says nope and walks back out. Would never explain why. I'm still confused 16 years later.
That's a strange story. It's always unexpected when someone turns down a job before even starting it. Makes you wonder what was going through his mind. Maybe he had second thoughts or just didn't like the vibe. It's curious how something so simple can stick with you for so long. A mystery that probably won't ever have an answer. Life can be pretty random like that.
A guy, qualified butcher, turned up for his first day of work at a butcher shop and does what he is told to do until lunchtime. Then the boss, who was a real dick at times, caught him shooting up and fired him on the spot. Turns out the guy was a diabetic and was giving himself his insulin shot. Ended up suing the boss and winning.
That's a pretty rough first day at work. It's wild how people jump to conclusions without knowing the full story. The boss really should have handled it better. At least the guy got justice in the end. It's a reminder that you can't judge someone without understanding their situation.
In 2007, I took a job at a staffing company. Early in the morning on my first day, I received another / better job offer via phone. When I came back from taking that phone call outside, I came back into my manager, who looked very relieved. He thought I had left. He told me the person who previously held my position went on a lunch break and never came back. As soon as he said that, I knew my destiny. I took my lunch later that day and vanished.
That's an interesting story. It's funny how things can change so quickly in the job world. You got a new opportunity right on your first day. The manager's reaction makes it even better. It's like a sign, you know? Sometimes you just have to trust your instincts and make a move. It seemed like the right call for you, and you just went for it. Good for you.
Where I work, we hired a sales rep, and he started Monday morning. He left for lunch and never came back. We found out, apparently, through a couple of his mutual friends that he decided, while at lunch, to go live as a wanderer primarily in South America. Apparently, he went home, packed a bag, and headed south.
That's an interesting move. Just packs up and leaves for an adventure like that. I guess some people just crave freedom and don't really look back. It must have been a surprise for everyone at work. You never really know someone's plans until they just act on them. Makes you think about what you'd do if you had the chance to just leave everything behind.
Hired a carpenter to work on a youth jail in a remote village in AK. Told him it was a secure facility and he would need to pass a background check. He said no problem. Put all the paperwork in, flew him out first thing Monday morning to start work. He's on site less than 4 hours when the state troopers roll up and arrest him for an outstanding warrant. Needless to say, he was also fired.
That's a pretty crazy situation. Hiring someone for a job thinking they're all good, then the police show up. Must have been awkward for everyone involved. Can't imagine how that poor guy felt getting arrested right after starting. Definitely not the start to a work week he was expecting. Just goes to show, sometimes things aren't what they seem.
I got fired from Subway after 4 hours for putting too many olives on a sandwich. Art is not subjective when it's sandwiches, I guess. Edit. This happened in 2000. The rule was either 4 or 6 slices per sandwich, and someone asked for extra, so I sprinkled a handful on there. After that sandwich, the owner pulled me into the back and asked why I put so many olives on there. I told him the customer asked for extra, and he kind of sighed and said, "I don't think this is going to work out." I went back the next day to turn in my green shirt and get my $20 back. Had to pay for the uniform myself.
That's rough, getting fired over olives. It's wild how something so small can lead to that. I guess some people take their sandwich art seriously. It's funny how rules can be so strict in fast food, though. At least you learned early on that not everyone's a fan of extra toppings. Losing a job after just a few hours must have felt strange. Not the best start, but it makes for a good story later.
In high school, I got hired at Dairy Queen. I turned up for my first shift, and the manager went to the back to get my hat/shirt/name tag. While I waited, a family friend who owned a furniture store came out of the bathroom, and when I told him that I was working at Dairy Queen, he said, "You don't want to work here. Come work for me instead." I did. As soon as the manager returned, I quit. All told, I was there less than 15 minutes.
I can relate to that. I had a similar experience when I started a summer job. The place just didn't feel right, and I ended up chatting with an old friend who offered me work at his uncle's shop. I took his advice, handed in my resignation, and left after a short time too. Sometimes, those quick decisions lead to better opportunities.
I got fired from a busboy job in high school after 4 hours. I was running around clearing tables and trying to keep up when this old lady kept asking me for matches. I kept telling her to please ask her waitress since I had no clue where they were. She yelled at me. I forgot what it was, but it pissed me off, so I went to the front desk, found a big bowl of matches, and dumped them in her lap. It was right then I realized I had no business dealing with the public.
That sounds frustrating. Dealing with customers can really test your patience. It's tough when you try to do your job and someone just keeps demanding. I can see how that moment made you realize that maybe working with the public isn't for everyone. Sometimes it's better to move on and find something that suits you better. At least you learned that early on.
The company I used to work in hired temps. We worked outside in a brutal winter that year, and the work was pretty difficult if you haven't been in the industry. I had about 6 temps in a row quit on the first day, but the one that stands out told me he needed to go to the washroom, quick time 5 minutes into teaching him the job. We watched him get in his car. We were 5 minutes from the parking lot, but there was a fence between the site and the lot, and drive off. I gave him a call asking where he went. Maybe it's an emergency? He said he was in the washroom. No, we just watched you drive off in your car. He told me I was a fucking liar, so I asked him if he'll be back in 10 minutes. 10 minutes at most. I decided since there's been a wave of people quitting, I'll give him a break. Maybe he's insecure and can't use a public washroom. 2 hours later, he returns with McDonald's and asked, "It's lunchtime, right?" I couldn't believe he had the balls. I was an unofficial supervisor, long story, but I told him to go home, and he was only getting paid the first hour he showed up.
That sounds like a wild day at work. I can't believe that guy thought he could just leave and come back like nothing happened. It's surprising how some people don't respect the job or the time of others. I've had my share of characters on the job, too. One guy tried to take a smoke break every hour, claiming it helped him focus. Some people just don't get it.
At the carnival, black guy walks over and asks to see the manager of this food area. The manager comes over, a tubby white guy with a big cowboy hat on. Black guy says he's looking for a job during the fair. Manager talks to him for about 2 minutes, then hires him. Manager says, "So, where do you want to work?" "I need a boy running stock from the back to the grill, a boy working the rib grill, a boy running the condiments, and a boy on the till." The black guy says, "Are you going to be calling me boy the whole time?" Manager says, "No, I'll be calling you rib boy, stock boy, till boy. Whatever job you wind up doing." Black guy says, "Nah, I won't be nobody's boy," and walks away.
This story just shows how important language and respect are in any job. It's a reminder that everyone has their limits, and people won't tolerate disrespect, no matter what the situation is. That guy walked away for a reason, and it's something the manager should reflect on. It's all about treating people right, regardless of the context. Just a simple lesson in respect, really.
10 years ago, I had my first job at a call center. We had to call random old people to sell them stuff they don't need. I really needed the money, so I sat down and called my first number. A very nice old lady picked up, and I just couldn't stick to the script they gave me. We started talking about her grandkids and life in general. I didn't try to sell her anything. Instead, I finished our phone call after more than an hour, stood up, left, and never came back.
That's an interesting experience. It's cool how you connected with someone instead of just following the script. I guess you realize that sometimes just talking means more than selling. Leaving after that call shows you had your priorities straight. It's a nice reminder that human connections matter more than a job sometimes.
One time, I found a neat way to get past the screensaver on our registers without entering an ID or password. I showed this to a new coworker. The next day, he was fired for stealing money from the register. We had cameras watching the registers for employees trying to steal money. I knew this. He knew this. Everyone knew this because it's the first thing they tell you during employee training.
That's an interesting situation. You showed him a shortcut, and then he ended up getting fired for something serious. It's strange how things can play out. You think you're just helping a coworker, and then it turns into a whole mess. It makes you wonder about the choices people make when they know the rules. Guess he didn't think that through.
A guy came into the restaurant that I worked at for training. He asked us, the rest of the servers, about how much we make a week in tips. We were busy on the weekends, but weekdays were pretty slow, so we made about $200 to $300 a week. Average was about $1,500 a month. He said that wasn't enough, that he was used to working in more fine dining, where you could make $1,000 a week in tips and left. I think it was about an hour in. We aren't fine dining, so I don't know what he was expecting.
It's interesting how people's expectations can be so different. That guy seemed really set on a certain standard, not realizing the vibe of the place. I remember when I started at a casual spot too, adjusting to the pace and tip amounts. Some people just don't get how it works in different settings. He probably should have done more research before jumping in. Just part of the job, I guess.
When I was in high school, I interviewed for a job as a claims agent for a windshield repair company. In a single phone call, I was told I was hired, but informed them I couldn't work weekends because of marching band, which they did not inquire about during the interview, and was then told that I was fired because of my unavailability. TLDR, under 2 minutes.
That's a pretty rough situation. It's strange how employers sometimes don't think ahead. You get hired and then bam, they change the rules. Marching band is a commitment, too. You would think they'd be more flexible. Just goes to show that job hunting can be unpredictable. At least it makes for a memorable story looking back.
Watched a woman ask the president of the company, "Who do you think you are?" When he asked her why she wasn't working, she was gone within the hour update since so many people asked. Here's the story. The woman started working that morning, but since she didn't know what a login password was, she had the password, but didn't know what to do with it. She sat at her desk and read a trashy romance novel in front of her computer. When the president of the company walks by and sees her sitting there, he asks her why she's not working. She asked him who does he think he is and that she never got her Yahoo account yet, her actual words. He said that he would look into it for her and asked her name. He marched into the HR office and said he wanted her gone. They walked her out about 5 minutes later.
That's an interesting situation. It's wild how some people react under pressure. The woman clearly didn't handle it well. Instead of asking for help, she pushed back. I guess the president's patience ran out pretty fast. It's a reminder that workplace dynamics can change quickly. If you can't adapt, things might not end well for you.
My friend was asked by an elderly family friend to do some yard work for them. He was 15 and had no money and no skills, so he agreed. He got there, and when he saw the yard, it was completely overgrown, weeds everywhere, rubbish thrown everywhere, and a few dead cats rotting on weeds. He thanked them for the opportunity and respectfully declined.
That's a tough situation for him. It's one thing to help out an elderly friend, but another to find a scene like that. It's good he recognized his limits and stepped back. Better to say no than to get overwhelmed or uncomfortable. I've been in similar spots, where the initial excitement fades once you see the reality of the task. Sometimes it's just not worth it.
When I was 18, I was between jobs and needed something fast. Decided to try my hand at being a petitioner since you theoretically get paid every day. I was given a 5-minute rundown of the issues I was collecting signatures for and was then dropped off in front of a nearby grocery store and left there on my own. People were literally parking right in front of me, would see me, then walk across the entire parking lot just so they wouldn't have to talk to me. I spent maybe 2 or 3 hours watching people go out of their way to avoid me before I finally said screw it and quit. So from beginning to end, I think I held that job for 4 hours.
That sounds pretty rough. I can see how trying to approach people like that would be tough, especially when they're avoiding you like the plague. It's funny how you think you're going to just collect signatures and make some quick cash, but reality hits hard. Quitting after just a few hours seems like a smart move, though. Better to walk away than spend all day feeling rejected.
When I was in college, a friend and I were going to hang drywall. He supposedly knew how to do this. We had none of the right tools. We started working, and after an hour, the supervisor shows up. "You boys are not going to make any money doing this. Get out of here. Wherever you are, bless you, man."
Sounds like a classic case of underestimating the job. It's always a head-scratcher when you think you know how to do something but realize you're totally unprepared. That supervisor probably saved you both some time and money. At least now you have a story to tell about college days and the struggle of DIY projects. Good times and bad lessons, right?
I was a shift manager at an industrial paint shop. Had a new temp start, and him and the other employees were out on the dock waiting clock in. One of the guys came and got me and said I needed to see something. I go out on the dock. He didn't know who I was yet. And he walks up with a little plastic cup and asked if I had any drink. I replied, "Well, like alcohol." He said, "Yeah." Fired him on the spot.
That sounds like a weird way to start a job. Showing up and asking for a drink before clocking in isn't the best look. I guess you have to set boundaries right away. It's like he didn't think about the consequences. Good call on your part to handle it immediately. You can't let those kinds of things slide, especially in a place like that.
There was a new girl who started as a host at the restaurant I work at. She was 18, and this was her first restaurant job, and she could only work 1 day a week due to a job conflict. She came in once. In the course of her duties that day, she locked herself in the walk-in fridge, which is unlocked at all times, and all you have to do is push against the door to get out. She banged on the door and yelled for help for a few minutes until a server heard and let her out. 2 people came in and went to the bar. She greeted them with a sing-song hello. An hour later when they left, she said goodbye in the same manner. The 2 patrons ignored her and left, at which point she calls them motherfuckers louder than she thought. A manager in training overheard. She never came back after that day.
That's pretty wild for a first day. The girl seemed nervous, but it's hard to believe she couldn't figure out the fridge. The whole sing-song thing must have been awkward, especially with the patrons ignoring her. It's a rough way to learn about customer service. Can't blame her for losing it, though. I guess that job just wasn't for her. It's kind of funny, but you hate to see someone bomb like that.
I got fired at a cold slab creamery, knock-off Cold Stone Creamery. I think I got fired after about 3 hours because the owner said I wasn't doing a good enough job. All of the new employees I got hired with received no training whatsoever either. Turns out the owner just wanted to hire us to fill the time gap between the store being open and his relatives coming over from a different state a week later. Needless to say, I laughed my ass off when the store went under.
That sounds like a wild experience. Getting fired after just 3 hours is pretty rough, especially with no training. It's funny how some places operate just to fill time. I guess in the end, it worked out for you when the store went under. Sometimes those unexpected moments lead to a good laugh later. What did you do next after that job?
I work as the front office supervisor at a hotel, basically front desk supervisor, but made to sound fancy. I'm responsible for training in all new employees, and as a 22-year-old with somewhat of a baby face, I've experienced my share of people not taking me seriously. We had this one girl who had a terrible attitude from the moment she walked in the door. She told me during her first hour that she couldn't take me seriously on account of being so much older than me. She was 28. After about a week of her constantly talking shit about the hotel and everyone in it while standing within earshot of guests, I took her into the office and basically told her to smarten up and think about whether this was the right fit for her. She handed me her name tag and told me she wouldn't be back. TLDR, I have a baby face that makes people quit.
It's interesting how attitudes can change based on appearances. You'd think experience would matter more than age. That girl clearly had her own struggles, but it's wild she couldn't see that you were in a position to help. Sometimes people just aren't ready to accept feedback, which can make things difficult. At least you handled it well and drew a line when needed. Now you've got another story to tell about your job.
At a large airplane manufacturer near Seattle, I was working IT and was at the orientation where we found out not only did we not have offices or cubicles, that we basically had nowhere to work and had to find space in labs that were constantly having lights shut off, or us IT people would be kicked out if they needed to use the display simulators. One guy with us had this deer in headlights look on his face and quit the same day, probably within 2 hours. I should have followed him out the door. It was a rough contract.
That sounds like a tough introduction to a job. It's always strange when you walk into a new workplace and realize it's not what you expected. The lack of space and constant interruptions can be really frustrating. I guess that guy felt it more intensely and made a quick exit. Sometimes it's better to leave than to stay in a situation that feels off. Not everyone can handle that kind of environment.
When my dad was a teenager, he was hired by an assisted living place, more of a hospice situation than assisted living. And he walked in the front door on his first day of work and continued walking right out the back door. Never went back. He was probably there for a total of 5 minutes. He said the smell and the oppressive nature of the place was too much to even consider staying.
That's an interesting story. It takes a lot for someone to walk away like that. I guess it shows that some environments just aren't for everyone. Sometimes, the pressures and realities of a job can hit hard, and if it doesn't feel right, it's better to trust your instincts. He probably figured it wasn't worth it to put himself through that.
I went to interview for a supposedly in-call only call center. The boss told me after the interview to go ahead and start working since I was free for the rest of the day. Within 20 minutes of being told to call confirmed leads, which turned out to be people who had never heard of the company or the product I was suddenly supposed to be selling them, I gave the boss some form of medical emergency excuse about my girlfriend at the time and left. He tried calling me later that day, but I just didn't answer. I don't like being told that I'm going to be working for a company that is strictly one thing only to get there and see everyone doing something complete opposite.
That's a rough situation. It sounds frustrating to walk into a job expecting one thing and get hit with something else entirely. I've been there too. You feel kind of trapped. At least you made a quick decision to leave. Not worth your time if the place isn't what they said it would be. Sometimes you just have to trust your gut and move on. Better luck next time, I guess.
We hired a woman about a year ago, paid over $1,000 just to help her relocate from out of state. She showed up day one and everything was going great. She seemed pleasant and was learning her responsibilities well. Day two, she isn't there at 8 a.m. We try calling her. No answer. Isn't there by noon. Isn't there by the end of the day. Never called in. Day three, she still hasn't shown up and now we are all worried. We call the apartment. Nobody has seen her. We called her family. Haven't heard from her. We called her old employer thinking she got cold feet. Swing and a miss. We called the police last and they started their own search. To this day, we've never figured out what happened to her. She just completely vanished into thin air.
That's pretty wild. It's strange how someone can just disappear like that, especially after moving for a job. I had a friend who did something similar once. He just left town with no explanation. We all wondered if he found something better or just wanted a fresh start. It leaves people wondering what was going on in their head. Sometimes life's just filled with these odd disappearances.
I work for my dad, and as such I had what most would call a manager's position, but it was more like I just made sure the workers kept working when my dad was not around. Well, this guy, maybe 29 or so we hired, comes in on his first, and I greet him and start telling him what to do and how to do it, the usual. Well, I go off and do my own thing for maybe 20 minutes when one of our other employees comes back and says the new guy is flipping shit because he has to work for someone so much younger than him, and it's unfair that I have a higher position than him just because I'm the boss's son and a bunch of other stuff. So I call my dad, and he told me that it is probably best to just send him on his way and to call the next person that had applied. So I fired him not even 28 minutes into the day.
Sounds like a rough start for that guy. It's always awkward when someone can't handle working under a younger boss, especially in a family business. Guess he thought he deserved better just because of his age or experience. It's interesting how quickly things can change in a workplace, though. One moment you're starting fresh, and the next you're looking for another job before the day even finishes. Just part of the game, I guess.
I quit a job before I even started. Accepted an offer at a car dealership selling brand new Hyundais. When they were doing reference checks, a previous employer of mine called me up and offered me a great salary with benefits and good vacation time. So I accepted, told the dealership what happened, and that I would not be able to work for them. They were very good about it and found it pretty ironic.
That's a pretty relatable situation. It's nice that the dealership took it well. Sometimes, you get unexpected opportunities that are just too good to pass up. It shows that sometimes the universe has a way of redirecting you. It's all about finding what works best for you, even if it means backing out at the last minute. Just goes to show, you never know what's around the corner.
I was in high school. I was wearing my school uniform, which was a blue polo and khakis, standing in a Best Buy on a computer filling out an application. Manager came over and fired me for messing around on the computers. He literally fired me before I was 5 questions into the application. I just left as I didn't want to work for an employer that didn't even know who worked for him.
That's a pretty interesting situation. Getting fired before even starting is something you don't hear often. I guess it says a lot about the management there. It's a good point to realize that if an employer can't recognize you, maybe their workplace isn't worth it. Better to move on than be stuck somewhere you don't fit in. It sounds like you handled it well.
I work as a team leader, under boss, in a greenhouse with tomatoes. Second week, he only works Saturdays, of a colleague. He comes to me if he can go home because he was bored. I went to my boss and he said, "Sure, but he can't come back then. TLDR. Guy was bored after 2 weeks and just left with permission."
It's pretty interesting how fast some people can check out. This guy barely made it 2 weeks, then decided boredom was enough reason to bail. It's kind of wild to think he thought it was okay to leave just like that. Guess not everyone's cut out for the job, especially when the work gets repetitive. It's a reminder that not everyone finds the same things engaging.
I got hired on at a small five and dime type place back in 1999 when I was about 19. I was due to start a shift as a cashier that day, and as I was walking to the front of the store with the owner, he was explaining to me how procedure worked, what my shifts were, and we paused as he explained that during my 8-hour shifts I would only get 1 or 2, I can't recall, breaks, but no lunches. We had stopped right by the OSHA poster with all the rules and regulations on it, and I glanced in it and I said, I don't think that's legal. And he told me I needed to get off the premises immediately. So, I don't even know if I can count that one as starting the job.
That's an interesting start to a job. It's wild how quickly things can change. You think you're about to start a new gig, and then you're told to leave because of some basic rights. I guess the owner didn't want to hear it. It's a reminder that some places don't really follow the rules. Makes you appreciate jobs where they actually care about employee rights. Sometimes it's just better to walk away.
Had a new hire in the ICU. She was staffed with following me and learning the ropes. It was a bad night. A very bad night. One patient had a heart attack and another patient's heart rate kept dipping down into the 30s. This on top of all the other patients being particularly busy and requiring a lot of attention. It was a shit night, but you get used to it, and every now and then it happens. Well, the next day, she was a no-show. No call, nothing. Turns out she quit and moved back home out of state. I don't know if it was the stress of it that caused her to leave or what, but I do know that my boss has never asked me to orient anyone since. I swear I did a good job, it was just a shit night.
That sounds like a rough night for both of you. The pressure in the ICU can be intense, and it's tough when someone isn't cut out for it. It's hard to say if that night scared her off, but it's clear she wasn't ready for the chaos that can happen. I guess the experience made your boss think twice about training new hires. Sometimes it just happens like that.
Didn't even finish signing the paperwork. We had interviewed someone, they'd passed through the interview, we were prepared to put them through a trial period, and when they were signing their paperwork, they asked, so what kind of paperwork do I need to get my vacations? I'm going on a 4-month vacation starting in 2 weeks. That won't be a problem, right?
That's a wild situation. You'd think someone about to start a job would check their schedule first. It's like they didn't care about the commitment at all. It's surprising when people are that upfront about taking time off before even starting work. Just goes to show how important it is to have clear communication about expectations from the get-go. Definitely saved everyone some hassle down the line.
Many years ago, I, along with about 100 other people, tempied for Microsoft, taking phone orders for software. They put us all in a room, gave us simple training on their order entry system, and off to work we went. One guy started his shift at 6 a.m., and at 6:20 he was pulled off the phones by a supervisor, Microsoft Security, and the Bellevue Police Department. Apparently he'd figured out how to send software to friends for free, and had spent his first 15 minutes of the day filling out freebie orders. Bam! He was gone and off in handcuffs. Bill Gates doesn't screw around.
That's a wild story. Imagine being so bold on the first day. He must have thought he was clever, but getting caught that fast is something else. It's crazy how quickly things can escalate in a corporate environment. I guess he didn't think about the consequences. Losing a job is one thing, but ending up in handcuffs is a different level. Guess he learned the hard way.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.